Papua New Guinea's Institute of National Affairs says the government must ensure that land is available for people to live on. It's a feature of life in PNG that tens of thousands of people live illegally as squatters on the fringes of the country's cities. Residents of one of the largest settlements in Port Moresby, Bushwara, are facing the threat of being forcibly moved as the owner of the site plans to build a new suburb there. Don Wiseman spoke with the Executive Director of the Institute of National Affairs, Paul Barker, about this latest settlement clearance and others that are likely.
All around the vicinity of Moresby, there are legitimate landlords and a whole host who have received their land through rather less legitimate means. Number One Super certainly has legitimate title. Some of the others, as I say, have far less credible title. It's certainly tough, but it highlights a much bigger issue, which is that the Prime Minister makes statements, for example, saying that, look, you've got to make sure that you've got proper title to land where you're going to go and live. But the reality is, who provides the land? In NCD, it's the same in all other towns and cities across the country, according to the Lands Department. There is totally inadequate land, state land, made available for the growing populations. So you inevitably are ending up with settlements. Many of the settlements have been there for very long periods of time, almost going back to World War II. And they're being relocated for new developments, as I say, often with less than legitimate land acquisitions by some of the new buyers. But in the case of NSL, well, yes, they do have a long established title, and people who were putting up houses there were given warnings. But yes, it is very challenging. And the settlements are a very large proportion of the entire population, and they are housing a large portion of the formal workforce as well as the informal workforce. So you're having people in the professions, lawyers, accountants, government workers, policemen, all on these settlement lands. And some of them have put very large sums of money into developing their houses. And then sometimes those are destroyed at very short notice. And we're understanding that there are a variety of other major demolitions that are being planned by other landlords around the place. Alternative arrangements could and should be made. I mean, when the city authorities have instigated or sometimes endorsed various settlements, there have been all these promises of, we'll replace your land with somewhere else where you can settle more suitably. But the reality is that that doesn't usually materialize. It's also, in many cases, the settlements are going on customary land, and customary landowners are reaching tentative arrangements with the settlers, which the settlers then think are actually legitimate, but then the customary landowners think, well, hang on, we've got other ideas, or we've got better deals, or whatever. So the onus is on government to enable both the customary landowners to legitimately trade their land if they so choose for long-term leases, adequate for settlers to actually be able to commit to building and maybe reselling properties over the course of time, but also for the state to acquire land legitimately and, of course, to allocate land through legitimate means, which means going through proper land board hearings or proper processes. And unfortunately, some of these land allocations are going through, in recent years, through direct grant arrangements or allocations exempt from advertising, often allocated to persons with special influence.
Is it common then that these people, squatters or settlers or whatever you call them, are they paying rent for this land at all?
In many cases, they are paying rent or they've paid for the land to someone. There are people who trade land to others. And as I say, with customary landowners, they do sell the land on some basis to settlers. And so vast areas of customary land, these are all direct deals between customary landowners and settlers, but they haven't really got legitimate legal title. And various players are are saying, including the new member for Hiri, is saying, look, we have to establish a mechanism so that customary landowners can actually lease out on a long-term basis their land, maintain the land title for themselves as the customary landowners, but nevertheless make it available if and where they wish on a long-term basis to settlers who can also then trade their properties or have the security of tenure to actually invest in those properties and really improve them. There are real issues with the city, because the city also would like to make sure that they get in first and install the necessary basic infrastructure. But of course, they move at a very slow pace.
What's the possibility of the owners and the squatters coming to an arrangement where the lots are surveyed and they buy the lot that they're living on? I understand that's actually happened in some parts of the Pacific.
Yeah, all kinds of special arrangements really could be made. And obviously those who've got title, like superannuation funds, and others who have legitimate title, want to safeguard their title and ensure that it's not encroached upon. But there are opportunities for them to work out arrangements which could safeguard the interests of both parties, ensure the safeguarding of the title and the proper development of their estates, but at the same time reaching arrangements with other parties for including maybe with some of the parties that are already on the land. But of course, it's an area that's fraught with risks, but nevertheless, we have to recognize that the state has a major responsibility to make sure that land, by one means or another, is able to be available legitimately. Obviously, the state has responsibilities itself of providing housing, and in every country you have a split between private sector housing, self-help housing, if you like, state housing for public servants, maybe persons with special needs and others, which the government really hasn't been doing for many years. But it's also facing this situation where urbanization has been happening at a fast rate because of poor services in the rural areas, in some cases because of conflicts. So some people, in the cases of conflicts, if you really could restore peace and harmony in their home provinces like Enga and Hela, would be willing to return if they could assure safety back home. But in the meantime, you have all these internally displaced people often ending up as squatters or staying with all their relatives in the national capital and adding to the population pressure and the demands on those houses. So it's something that needs to be addressed. Government that needs to take responsibility and not wash his hand and say it's someone else's responsibility, or just wag their finger and say, you settlers, you need to ensure that you're going in legitimate land, because, it's not available unless the government ensures the mechanisms and the legitimacy of where they can go.
It's not a new problem. It's been going on for a long time. So why is the government dragging its feet?
That's a good question. I mean, amongst other things, I would have to say that the land has been an area where there's been a lot of malpractice. You've had a succession of lands ministers who've looked after themselves, lands department officials who've looked after themselves. So a lot of slices of the state land have been carved out and allocated through backdoor means rather than front door means. You've got a situation as a result where you've got a lot of multiple titles on some land. Even, where the banks think they have a mortgage over land, they find out that others also have title to that land. So making the whole land process much more transparent and much less of an area for largesse to political or public service officials, making the process more legitimate, making sure that there's more land is properly acquired, and enabling the customary landowners to more formally transact on their land, both to safeguard themselves for their own future land needs, but also to enable them, where they decide that they are going to make it available to buyers, that there is a formal lease market that is recognized, because at the moment only state land is allowed to be leased out in law anyway.